Am I the a-hole for leaving my wife after supporting her for 7 years? For context, my wife and I never wanted to get married. Both of us came from severely abusive homes growing up. The abuse was mostly because our parents hated each other, but they refused to get divorced and instead took out all their rage and resentment on us. Growing up in those environments conditioned both of us to view marriage as a trap, a legal lock that keeps you bound to someone after they turn abusive, making escape feel impossible. It terrified both of us from a young age. We started dating in high school, finding comfort in each other because we were the only ones who truly understood what was happening behind closed doors at our respective houses. After we graduated, I worked a string of dead-end jobs trying to save up enough money to move out on my own, but minimum wage and living expenses made it impossible. I eventually joined the military just to finally get away from my parents and have a guaranteed path out. My then girlfriend, now wife, and I transitioned into a long-distance relationship for a few years. She stayed behind to go to college while I was away. I was lucky enough to get stationed within a driving radius that allowed me to come down and visit her about once a month whenever I had a 4-day weekend pass. She was living in a college dorm for the first few years and was so close to graduating, but then things fell apart. Her father suddenly decided he was no longer going to co-sign her financial arrangements and forced her to move back into his house. Once she was under his roof again, the abuse became unbearable. He installed tracking software on her car, constantly monitoring her every move, and would remotely trigger the car's panic alarm to make it honk whenever she drove somewhere he didn't approve of. He refused to let her go anywhere except straight to work, school, or home, keeping her under absolute surveillance. Her life was miserable, and watching her crumble from a distance was breaking me. I told her that if we got legally married, the military would increase my pay to accommodate a dependent, allowing us to get a house on base so she could transfer and finish college near me. At first, she refused because her fear of being locked into a marriage was still so strong. But one afternoon, after I got back from a brutal week out in the field, I turned my phone back on and was hit with a barrage of hundreds of missed calls and urgent text messages. Her father had pushed her past her breaking point. She had packed a single suitcase with a few clothes, grabbed her birth certificate and social security card, and fled to my mom's house. For a bit of background, my parents had finally divorced soon after I left for the military. Once they were separated and couldn't take their anger out on each other anymore, they actually became really chill, and my mom even apologized for everything she put me through growing up. It isn't a perfect relationship by any means, but my mom took her in without question. I immediately requested a 4-day weekend pass, drove down, and we went straight to the courthouse to get married. She packed up her remaining belongings, came up with me, and we moved into our house on post. Once we were living together, I realized the full extent of her trauma was way worse than I had originally thought. She flat out refused to live anywhere off post because she was paralyzed by the thought of her father and stepmother finding her, insisting that the military installation was the only super secure area where she could feel safe. Every time we were driving near town and she saw a car that remotely resembled theirs, she would spiral into full-blown panic attacks, hyperventilating in the passenger seat. The first 6 months of our marriage were an absolute nightmare. She would cry herself to sleep every single night, her body shaking under the blankets. Every morning I would wake up to the sound of her quietly sobbing beside me. I would leave for morning PT and my work shift, and when I came back hours later, I would find her quietly sobbing in the exact same corner of the room where I had left her. Despite her not moving all day, the house would somehow be completely trashed around her, covered in clutter and chaos. I would cook meals from scratch and sit beside her on the floor, begging her to eat a few bites and drink some water. She would reluctantly take a few swallows just to appease me, and then night would fall, she would cry herself to sleep again, and the entire devastating cycle would repeat the next day. I spent endless hours coordinating with military resources, eventually getting her signed up for therapy and helping her enroll in a local college. Having a routine seemed to help her somewhat, but deep down, her mental state remained deeply unstable. Fast forward, and we have been married for 7 years now. Over that entire span of time, she has never held down a job, consistently citing her mental health as the reason she couldn't work. For a long time, I was completely fine with taking on the entire financial load. I was very disciplined with money, saved carefully, and made enough to comfortably provide for both of us without her needing to earn an income. Her mental health fluctuated, improving slightly at times, but it was never truly good. At one point, she gained 80 pounds in a relatively short window entirely from ordering food through Uber Eats and Instacart. She explained that her anxiety made her terrified to step foot outside the front door, so she felt she had no choice but to have every single item delivered. But it went deeper than just agoraphobia. She confided that she was struggling with heavy self-harm urges, but because she knew I would notice physical marks and force her to discuss them with her therapist, she found a different way to act on those compulsions. She began deliberately ordering incredibly greasy, deeply unhealthy fast food to the house, gorging on it specifically to trigger severe stomach aches and physical pain. She managed to spend over $10,000 over the course of a single year doing this. I didn't catch on to the financial strain right away because she had asked to manage our household budget, telling me that taking care of the finances made her feel like she was contributing something meaningful to our marriage. I trusted her completely and never questioned how the money was being allocated, a massive mistake on my part, I know. Furthermore, when we first got married, she was slightly underweight by about 5 to 10 pounds. My mom, who was overweight herself, had constantly drilled into my head growing up that a man should never, under any circumstances, question a woman about gaining weight. Between that ingrained advice and my desire not to trigger her, I waited far too long to ask hard questions about what was happening to our bank account and her physical health. Eventually, everything came crashing down around us when I was chaptered out of the military. To make a very long story short, her mental health plummeted to a point where she began constantly attempting suicide. Because I was continuously pulled away to manage these severe crises, preventing her from harming herself, I was classified as non-deployable for too long. The military eventually had no choice but to discharge me. I immediately scrambled to secure our future, lining up a promising career path as a police officer for as soon as my discharge was official. But right before I could transition into the academy, I was involved in a severe motorcycle accident and completely tore my ACL. The injury was a massive blow. It meant I had to undergo reconstructive surgery and complete months of rigorous physical therapy before my knee would be functional enough to meet the physical standards of the police department. Because I was out of the service and unable to work or take the police job yet, we ran out of options. We couldn't afford a place of our own anymore, so we had to make the difficult decision to temporarily separate our living arrangements. I had to move back in with my mom, and my wife had to move back in with her mother, as neither house was large enough to accommodate both of us together. When the accident happened and my military career officially ended, my wife was furious. She offered virtually no sympathy or emotional support for my injury or the loss of my career, expressing anger toward me rather than concern. It was only when I directly called her out on her coldness that she backtracked and tried to act a little more caring. Shortly after we moved to our respective parents' houses, she dropped another bomb during a phone call, telling me flat out that she didn't want to have horizontal tango with me anymore because I had gained weight since the accident. Being completely unable to walk properly, banned from exercising, and stress eating while watching every single plan I had crafted to keep us afloat shatter into pieces will take a toll on your body. I had put on about 20 pounds over the last 2 months. What made her comment sting so deeply was the hypocrisy. She has never lost the 80 pounds she put on during her delivery binge and has actually put on even more weight since then. She is currently 50 pounds over the absolute highest recommended weight for her height and age. While I definitely have a noticeable belly now from being laid up with a destroyed knee, I can still bench press over 300 pounds and you can clearly see the underlying muscle from my years in the service. Yet, she used my physical setback as a reason to reject me. The final straw happened today. I received an official letter from the VA stating that they would only approve and cover 15 physical therapy sessions for my knee rehabilitation. My physical therapist had explicitly told me earlier in the week that my ACL tear was severe enough that I would realistically need at least 40 sessions to fully regain functional mobility. Realizing I was facing a massive gap in my recovery, I immediately went back to the physical therapist to map out an alternative plan, trying to figure out how to maximize my progress or stretch our options. When I called my wife later that afternoon to update her on the situation, I couldn't even finish explaining what the VA had said before she cut me off, snapping in anger. She immediately started stressing about the money, angrily declaring that we couldn't possibly afford to pay out of pocket for extra therapy sessions. Without missing a beat, she told me that I would just need to drive more hours for Uber to cover the cost of my medical treatment, because her part-time income certainly wasn't going to cover it. I lost my temper. The sheer lack of concern for my physical recovery knocked the wind out of me. It felt like she didn't care at all about the fact that my body was broken or that I was struggling to regain the ability to walk normally. All she cared about was how my injury was going to financially inconvenience her. We ended up in a bitter, explosive argument over the phone that lasted for over half an hour. Eventually, she backed down and apologized, claiming that being back in her mother's house was bringing out the worst in her. She said her mom was still abusive and that she felt an overwhelming sense of jealousy toward me because I got to live with a mom who wasn't abusive anymore. While her mother does yell at her and treat her poorly, it is nowhere near the level of terror her father and stepmother inflicted on her years ago. I'm not saying her current living situation is good, but there is quite literally nothing I can do to change it right now. Every career path I am qualified for requires me to be fully able-bodied, which I am explicitly not at this moment. Furthermore, she isn't qualified for a job that pays enough to cover real bills either, having only worked brief stints in fast food over the years alongside a massive 3-year gap in her employment history. Since we moved back to our hometowns, she has already quit 3 different part-time jobs for a variety of minor reasons, throwing her hands up every time things get slightly uncomfortable. I am sitting here with a torn knee, no military career, no police job, and limited VA coverage, feeling like the entire crushing weight of fixing our shattered lives is being placed squarely on my shoulders. Historically, I was always willing to carry that burden without complaint because I loved her deeply and wanted to protect her from the world. But over these past few months, as I've laid in bed recovering, I have been forced to see the reality of our dynamic. She doesn't seem to care about my health, my pain, or my well-being in the slightest. She only cares about what I can provide for her and how comfortably I can sustain her life. That realization has eroded everything I felt for her, and I have completely fallen out of love. Would I be the a-hole for divorcing her? Update. Some people said they wanted an update, so I thought I'd give one. It's been over a month, and a lot has happened. After my original post, I sat down with my wife and told her that something had to change. I told her that we either needed to go to couples counseling and seriously work on our marriage, or we needed to move forward with a divorce. I wasn't trying to threaten her or force her into anything, but I had reached a point where I couldn't continue living the way we had been. She reacted very badly. She had a panic attack and started saying she couldn't handle losing me. She also threatened suicide, and it turned into a situation that lasted for several days. Because of that, I contacted a lawyer and started looking into the divorce process, but I paused everything when she eventually agreed to attend couples counseling. When we went to our first appointment, I was honestly nervous. After reading comments and hearing things from people I know, I expected the counselor to automatically take one person's side and dismiss the other. That wasn't what happened at all. From the beginning, the counselor listened to both of us. She acknowledged my wife's struggles and trauma, but she also recognized the issues I was bringing up. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my concerns were actually being heard. My wife also seemed to be understanding what I was saying instead of immediately becoming defensive. For a short time, I thought maybe there was a chance we could fix things. Then, the week after our first session, we got into an argument. My ACL injury meant I couldn't do many of the things I used to do. Even simple activities outside the house were difficult because standing or walking for too long caused pain. During the argument, my wife said something that completely changed how I looked at our relationship. She told me that I was foolish for putting so much effort into helping her during her mental health struggles and that just because I chose to take care of her did not mean she owed me the same thing in return. I told her that hearing that from my wife hurt deeply. She apologized afterward, and I tried to move forward. However, during our next therapy appointment, she brought up the same belief again. The counselor explained that this mindset was something my wife needed to work on individually because no relationship could survive if one partner truly believed they had no responsibility to support the other. My wife broke down and said she had already spent 7 years in therapy and didn't think she was capable of changing. Hearing that was difficult because it made me realize that we weren't just dealing with a rough period. We were dealing with something much deeper. The next day, I told her that I believed our marriage was over. Her reaction was terrifying. She called me and threatened to kill me, then go on a crime spree, and then take her own life. It was a chaotic 10-minute phone call where she was extremely emotional and saying different things rapidly. From what I understood, she first talked about wanting to hurt me because she felt abandoned. Then she said that would be too easy and started talking about committing crimes because she believed being arrested would give her a place to stay since she felt unable to take care of herself. After that, she talked about how prison wouldn't be a solution and that ending her life would be easier. I didn't know what else to do, so I contacted the police. She was taken to a mental health facility for evaluation and treatment. The next morning, I woke up to a call from someone listed as healthcare on my phone. It was my wife calling from the facility. She was angry that I had contacted the police. She told me I had ruined her life because she might lose her job and that I would be responsible for a large amount of medical debt because she couldn't afford the treatment. At that point, I ended the call and contacted my attorney. Unfortunately, he was on vacation for a week, so there wasn't much I could do immediately. Since then, things have been relatively quiet. I found out that my wife was released from the facility, but I haven't had much contact with her. On my side, I finally had my ACL surgery. Recovery has actually been going well. My doctor was impressed with my progress, but warned me not to push myself too quickly because re-injuring it at this stage would set me back significantly. My lawyer has been back for a while now, and my wife will officially be served with divorce papers this week. I hope the process can be calm and straightforward, but based on everything that has happened, I don't expect it to be easy. She has already said she plans to fight about everything.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update.